In the dead of night, couples Cameron and Janice Hooker drive to the forest to dispose of a body. Janice is anxiously holding a rosary, worrying about what they did, but Cam reassures her that everything was an accident. After successfully burying the body, they hurriedly leave the place. A year after, Colleen Stan hitchhikes from Oregon to California to visit a friend. Cameron and Janice drive past her and offer her a ride to Westwood, which the young woman accepts. On the way to their destination, the couple asks her a series of questions, and they discover that Colleen's friend is not expecting her to show up. They stop at a gasoline station for a quick break. While Colleen goes to the restroom, Cam takes a wooden box from the trunk and places it in the back seat. They continue the ride, and Cam says they'll stop by the ice caves before going to Westwood. Colleen is hesitant because she's hoping to arrive before dark, but she agrees anyway. Later on, the couple stops the car in a secluded area. Janice leads the way to the said caves, but Colleen is starting to speculate that something's wrong. Just then, Cam places a knife against Colleen's neck. Left with no choice, she complies for fear of getting killed. Cam covers her eyes and puts her hands in cuffs. He forces her into the car and places her head inside the wooden box. After this, the couple drives off. Cam and Janice wait till dark before bringing Colleen into their house in Red Bluff. Once they arrive, Cam undresses Colleen and ties her up. Then, he relentlessly whips her while Janice stands and watches. Cam gets turned on by all this violence, and he briefly makes out with Janice. Shortly after, he tells her to take a box from upstairs. He's had enough of Colleen for the day, so he chains her to a table and puts her head in the box once again. The next morning, Janice anxiously asks Cam about his plans. He says they'll drop Colleen off somewhere when he gets tired of her. After this, he leaves the house for work. Once she's alone, Janice prays with her rosary, but she gets disturbed by Colleen's crying. She goes downstairs with a shotgun in hand. There, Colleen begs to let her go while promising that she won't tell the police. Janice contemplates, but she chooses not to give in to Colleen's plea. Later that night, Cam comes home, and he feeds Colleen and makes her pee in a urinal. After this, he whips her again. Janice could only force herself to listen to her headphones to distract herself from Colleen's screams. As the couple prepares to sleep, Janice tells Cam that Colleen will report them if they let her go. Hearing this, Cam decides to keep her in the basement until they figure things out. However, Janice doesn't like this idea, so Cam gaslights her into thinking that she should obey him because she made a sacred vow when they got married. To make her feel better, he says they can start a family, and he'll stop tying her up because Colleen would suffice for that. This sounds good to Janice, but she makes Cam promise never to copulate with Colleen and to only stick to slavery. Cam agrees to this, and at midnight, he creates a coffin-sized box and locks Colleen inside it. Inside the box, Colleen gets hallucinations about seeing the blue sky again. She also remembers her dad insisting she takes the bus, but she refuses. She also remembers the little voice in her head back at the restroom, telling her to leave. She regrets the choices she made that led her to the current situation. Meanwhile, Colleen's parents receive a call because her rent is due. This is when they realize that nobody has seen their daughter for some time. Worried, they report her as missing to the police. 6 months later, Janice goes to Cam's workplace to inform him that she's pregnant. However, he's unfazed by the news. Janice tells her it's probably time to get rid of Colleen because a kid will be in the house. But Cam protests, saying that she might report them to the police. A month after, Janice comes home after a knee operation. As they head into the house, their landlord asks if he could get their furnace in the basement checked. However, Cam simply says he'll get back to him on that matter. When they get inside, Janice mentions that it's like her knee is hammered, and Cam remembers a magazine with the same name. He looks for the magazine and sees a slave contract, and he realizes that he can keep Colleen by manipulating her with it. Shortly after, he convinces Colleen that he's part of a company that sells slaves. If she escapes, the company will track her down and hurt her family. He even says they busted Janice's leg, but he saved her. Desperate to have a child, Janice backs up Cam's lies, and she doesn't argue when her husband claims that she was once his slave, but he took pity on her and married her. Then, Cam says he needs to formally register Colleen because if he doesn't, the company will take her away. With this, he makes Colleen sign a contract that supposedly formalizes her status as Cam's property. Afraid that her family would get hurt, Colleen signs it. The following day, Cam dresses Colleen and puts a collar on her neck. He changes her name to Kay, and she must treat him and Janice like her masters. He also trains her to run to a corner, remove her gown, and raise her hands whenever he shouts, "Attention." Cam tests this command on her, and Kay delivers immediately. However, as he caresses her body, Janice catches him, but he explains that he's only training the slave. After this, Kay scrubs the floor and finds a Bible. However, Janice gets mad at her for touching it, reminding Kay that she has no value and is only there to take the pain. She then spills the bucket full of water, adding more weight to Kay's chores. A few months later, the landlord asks Cam if he can now check the furnace. However, Cam gets annoyed and tells him they're busy. When he gets inside, he tells Janice they need to move to a new place. Not long after, Janice gives birth to a baby girl named Amber, and only Cam assists her in her labor. While she screams in agony, Kay is locked inside the wooden box under the bed. Cam allows Kay to come out of the box to meet the child briefly, but he immediately sends her back after. A year later, Cam and Janice move to a new place. One time during dinner, Janice notices Kay didn't lay out a fork for her. She calls her lazy and a liar and convinces Cam to return her to the company. Cam gets mad at Kay, and he whips her. However, Janice notices that the fork merely fell on the floor, and she feels guilty for what she's done. The next morning, Cam scares Kay with a story about a slave who got tortured because she tried to escape. Then, he reminds her of how lucky she is that he's her master. A few days later, Cam removes Kay's collar and dresses her in normal clothes. He takes her out to gather some firewood in the mountains, and she's beyond glad to finally get outside. There, she asks if she could go home one day, but Cam says it's unlikely. However, he'll allow her to write a letter home, making Kay smile. Suddenly, Cam injures himself with the axe, and Kay hesitates to use his opportunity to escape. However, she stays and helps him. When they get home, Kay tends to Cam's injury. However, Janice gets jealous, and she does the job herself. Before the couple sleeps, Janice initiates making love with her husband, but he refuses. Because of this, she asks if he still loves her because she's noticing that he cares more about Kay. Cam reminds her that Kay is also her slave and they could share her. When Janice agrees, Cam quickly heads to the box and lets Kay out. He ties her to the bed and prepares to include her in copulating. However, this becomes displeasing to Janice's eyes, and she angrily leaves the room. She argues with Cam and commands him to put Kay back in the box and never touch her again. 3 years pass, and Kay is still held captive by Cam and Janice. One time, Janice lets her out of the box to empty her urinal, and she sees Amber. The little girl is all grown up, making her wonder how many years it's been since her abduction. One day, the hookers decide to go out to Lake Tahoe. They leave Kay in her box, but her ventilation system malfunctions, so the scorching heat causes her to hallucinate. In her vision, Kay sees her sister Bonnie and tells her that she needs to figure out why God is making her suffer. After all, he says there's a reason for everything. Kay also hallucinates about swimming in the abyss and seeing an angel. Suddenly, she wakes up and frantically kicks the box until it busts open. Later on, Cam, Janice, and Amber arrive from the lake. Right away, Cam discovers that the box is broken, and Kay is nowhere to be found. He looks around the house and finds her behind the shower, hugging a Bible. She comes up with an alibi about the broken box, saying she's merely thirsty. While Cam fixes the box, Kay shares that she's looking for answers about God's promise of having reasons for everything. That night, Cam remembers what Kay said, so he opens the Bible and annotates a page about slaves that must obey their masters. Later on, he tells Janice that he needs to let Kay out of the box if she doesn't satisfy his fantasies. Justifying that the Bible says a man is entitled to more than one wife, Cam convinces Janice to make Kay a part of their family. Since Janice wants to work things out with him, she agrees. After this, Cam lets Kay out of the box and feeds her. Later on, he ties her up and whips her to satisfy himself. Not long after, he leaves the house, and Janice takes the opportunity to open Kay's box. She wants to read the Bible with her, and Kay is beyond happy to participate. They read the passage about Abraham's wife Sarah and his slave Hagar, and Janice explains how Cam believes they're much like the two women. With this, she tells Kay that they must learn to get along and share Cam. She also tells her to call her Jan instead of ma'am. 5 years pass, and Cam starts sleeping with Kay as if they're husband and wife. One time, he tells her that God brought them together for a reason, and they could even get married and have children. However, Kay isn't sure about bearing his child because he doesn't trust her enough. With this, she asks him to let her see her family, but Cam says the company won't allow it. They grow silent for a moment, but Kay suddenly asks when his fascination with bondage starts. Cam shares that he started drawing pictures of women getting tied up when he was a child. Then he met Jan, and she was the first woman who let him try out things on her. However, he claims that she's never been able to handle it well, unlike Kay. Just then, Kay asks what he'd do if someone did those things to Amber, and says he'd kill them. With this, Kay asks what he thinks her dad feels. This triggers Cam, so he sends Kay back to her box. A few days later, Janice and Kay go to church together. However, the priest's homily feels a little too personal for Janice, and she trembles while remembering her sins. Kay expresses her concern, so she holds her hand to offer comfort. As time passes, Janice can barely tolerate her husband's abusive behavior. She starts to feel more sympathy for Kay and gets more concerned about Amber's future. A year later, Cam tells Kay that the company allowed her to visit home. This delights her, but Cam says he needs to do some obedience training before she's allowed to leave. Shortly after, Cam brings her outside and hands her a shotgun. Then, he tells her to point the barrel in her mouth and pull the trigger. Kay cries, thinking she might die at that moment, but she obeys anyway. Thankfully, the gun doesn't fire, and Kay is still alive. Then, Cam looks at her with satisfaction and says they should write to her parents about visiting. The next morning, Cam drives Kay to her parents' house. On the way there, he shares how much he spent to make all of this happen, so Kay expresses her gratitude. It doesn't take them long to arrive at their destination. However, before Kay meets her family, Cam reminds her that the company is observing them, so she shouldn't screw up. He doesn't stick around to meet Kay's parents, but he leaves her with them, and he'll come to pick her up when the weekend's over. Kay also introduces him as Mike, her boyfriend. Although Kay's parents are beyond delighted to see her, Bonnie can't help but notice that something is off with her sister. Although she wants to address the issue, her dad doesn't want her to open the topic because it might ruin the moment. That night, Bonnie can't help but ask why Kay hasn't kept in touch with them for so long. She tries to squeeze the truth out of her, but Kay remains firm and evades the topic. The next morning, Bonnie pleads with her sister to tell her what's wrong. Kay contemplates, but when she's about to speak, Cam arrives to pick her up. While Kay packs up her things, Cam speaks to her parents. He says they've been dating for a while and are planning to get married soon. Kay's parents are delighted with this news, but Bonnie can't help but speculate. When Kay returns to join them, Bonnie asks where they currently live. Cam responds that they're staying in California, but Bonnie knows that Kay recently told her they stayed in Oregon. This strengthens her doubts, but she doesn't say anything. Cam leaves home with Kay, and that night, Janice overhears him talking about marrying her. He even wants to start a family with her, which is something that he deprived Janice of. The next morning, Kay catches Janice packing up her things, so she asks where she's headed. At first, she says she's going to visit her parents, but then she reveals that she wants to end her marriage with Cam. Cam catches her leaving, so he tells her to go back inside the house. However, Janice has had enough of him, and she leaves with her dad and Amber. Cam is left distraught, and when Kay tries to comfort him, he gets mad and reminds her that she's still his slave. He shouts attention, and Kay immediately stands in the corner and undresses. However, this doesn't ease Cam's anger, so he drags her into a basement in his shack. Before he closes the door, he tells her someone will be joining her shortly. After this, he gets into his truck and drives away. Elsewhere, Janice hysterically prays alone in a church. Meanwhile, Kay remains in the basement, shivering from the cold rain. Suddenly, someone opens the door, and it's Janice. She lets Kay out and dresses her, then tells her to leave. However, Kay argues that Cam is merely angry. Because of this, Janice reveals that she and Cam held a girl captive before Kay's abduction. Her name was Marlitz, and they took her a year before her. At first, Cam promised it would be a mere game, but when he took her home, she wouldn't stop screaming. Because of this, Cam killed her, and together, he and Janice buried her body. This event traumatized Janice, and she spent the rest of her days praying, hoping that God would forgive her. Shortly after, Cam returns home and grabs a shovel on his way to the shack. However, by the time he arrives, Janice has already taken Kay to the bus stop. When the bus arrives, Janice tells Kay to go home, but she hesitates because of the company. With this, Janice reveals that it was all made up, and Cam was never part of any company. Kay takes a while to grasp the truth, but when she snaps back to her senses, she gets out of the car and enters the bus. As she heads home, Cam hysterically cries on the floor. Not long after, Cam gets sentenced to 104 years in prison. On the other hand, Janice gets immunity from prosecution in return for testifying against her husband. Although she testified for Marlitz's death, the body was never found. According to the police, Colleen's abduction lasted for 2,640 days, which is the equivalent of 7 years. She says that her survival was fueled by faith, and in the end, it saved her.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.